Hey, I'm Bernie Borges, founder of Fulfilled at Work Academy, and I want to welcome you to this webinar replay. Gain clarity and fulfillment in your career, unlock your path forward. This webinar is a condensed version of a live workshop that I facilitate called the Clarity to Fulfillment Intensive, and you're going to hear more about that in this webinar recording video. Now, over the next 40 minutes, you're going to get an inside look at the process that I used and is now available to help others move from feeling stuck or frustrated in their careers to gaining clarity and purpose. This process was game-changing for me, and it might be for you as well. Now, this webinar is not about job search hacks or climbing the corporate ladder. It's about reconnecting with what matters most to you, your values, your purpose, and your fulfillment across all areas of life. I unpack that in this webinar recording. What you'll learn here is deeply personal, and you can apply it right away in your life and career. In this webinar, I share my story, including the moment that I realized that I was successful on paper, but unfulfilled in reality. And I'll walk you through the self-leadership process that I came up with and I'm making available to you here in this webinar recording. Now, I want to encourage you to grab the free Values and Fulfillment Alignment Guide if you haven't already. It's the same tool that we use in the workshop, and then follow along as I explain how it works. Now, if this resonates and you want to go deeper, I invite you to check out the next Clarity to Fulfillment Intensive. It's a 3-hour experiential small group session where you'll get to work through the guide and share your reflections with others on a similar path while they share their reflections with you. And let me tell you, there's power in peer group discussion. All right, let's dive into the webinar replay. All right. Welcome. I am the founder of Fulfilled at Work Academy. And thank you for joining today. As I said, this is a meeting style webinar. And, I really put a lot of thought into the title of this webinar, Gain Clarity and Fulfillment in Your Career. And why? Because it can unlock your path forward. So what I want to do in our time together here is present content from a workshop that I deliver. So full disclosure, I want you to know that this is content from a workshop that I deliver. And at the end, I'll tell you a bit more about the workshop and some details in case you're interested in joining that. The difference between the workshop and what I'm presenting to you today is two things. One is workshop's 3 hours long. This is in the range of 45, 50 minutes up to an hour with, conversation and that sort of thing. But also the workshop is interactive, very interactive and engaging, where you would actually be going through the exercise that I'm going to show you today. So that's the difference between what I'm presenting and what my workshop actually looks like. So I like to begin with, why are you here? Here's what I'll do. I've just launched a poll. I encourage you to be completely honest and transparent about why you're here. Why did this topic appeal to you? And so 100% of the people who took the poll are stuck and frustrated in their career. You are in very good company. I was there not very long ago, which is what led me to where I am right now. So where I am right now is I'm the founder of Fulfilled at Work Academy. It's a company that I started this year, so it's a new company. And what led me to founding Fulfilled at Work Academy is the process that I'm going to actually show you. In other words, having gone through the process that I'm going to show you is what led me to not just motivating to starting this, but giving me the why behind it, giving me the insight into this is what I need to do at this point in my career. And quite frankly, at this point in my life. So here's what I'm going to cover. I'm going to reveal a process that can give you clarity in your career. And in my case, speaking for myself, it was not limited to my career, my life in general. What I'm not planning to do is give you hacks on how to find a new job. That, in fact, I'm not even going to suggest that you should find a new job, although if you want to, that is a personal choice. However, the clarity that this process can give you can certainly contribute if you are, in fact, looking for a new job. So that's what I'm planning to cover and also not cover. So, specifically, what it's going to look like today is I'm going to cover what I call three key shifts to unlock clarity and fulfillment in your career. This is the process that, again, I went through. And then also why traditional career strategies leave so many of us unfulfilled. I was experiencing that and also how to move from stuck to inspired. So I'm actually going to cover the three key shifts. And then along the way, I'll be commenting on the other 2 points, why the traditional strategies leave so many of us unfulfilled and how moving from stuck to inspired can really make a difference, especially when we don't have to figure it out alone. So let me begin with the pain point that many of us experience. And I know I was experiencing this. I felt like I was successful on paper, but I was not fulfilled in real life. And I'm talking just like a year and a half ago. So I'm not going back 10 years. I'm going back like a year and a half ago. Success on paper, meaning I had a title, I had decent compensation, I had tenure that was, I don't mean college professional kind of tenure. I mean, measured in decades of experience. I had some accolades, I had some recognition, I had those things, but yet I still didn't feel fulfilled. Now, I know for a lot of people, they can be affected by a layoff. While I actually did experience a layoff, it wasn't a surprise. So it wasn't a shock and it wasn't even a painful thing. I knew it was coming, I was prepared for it, and it was fine. But a lot of people go through the shock of an unexpected layoff. And so this is what a lot of people are experiencing. It's either a combination of they're drifting in their career, they're just stuck, they're frustrated, or maybe they've been hit by the layoff. So, what I discovered is that I needed to find clarity. And I am not exaggerating when I say that once I found clarity, which I'm going to walk you through how I found clarity, how that was life changing, not just career changing, but life changing. And I also discovered the power of fulfillment in that process. And what it led me to understand is that fulfillment is a performance strategy. And I'm going to unpack that for you because I know if you're hearing that for the first time, it may not make a lot of sense, but I think it'll make some sense once I unpack that for you. I mentioned that one of the things that I'm going to cover and spend some time on is the three key shifts to getting unstuck. So, shift number one is to embrace fulfillment. So, what is fulfillment? I define it right here at the bottom. Fulfillment is the second most powerful emotion in our humanity. In case you're wondering, you probably know the first one, and that's love. Love is the most powerful emotion in our humanity. Fulfillment is the second most powerful emotion in our humanity. Fulfillment is tied to achievement and purpose, and fulfillment is nearly always immutable. So, what I mean by that is when we experience fulfillment in any area of our life, and fulfillment can be large, medium, or small. If you did something last night, like you tried a new recipe last night and it turned out well, that's fulfillment. When you're like, hey, I tried something, I achieved cooking a new recipe and it turned out well. That's a small achievement that can give us fulfillment. Medium size and bigger fulfillment is associated with projects and finishing a degree or a certification or getting that promotion or finding the right job or some other kind of an achievement. Once we experience achievement that gives us that sense of fulfillment, that emotion, nothing can take that away. That is what I mean by fulfillment is nearly always immutable. If you can really just let that sink in, because when I realized that, that's when I realized that I need to be pursuing fulfillment in order to really gain the clarity and the motivation and the inspiration to go do what I want to do and need to do in my career. So, shift number one is to embrace the power of fulfillment. Again, it's the second most powerful emotion in our humanity. Now, this led me to, now I'm taking it back to 2023 when I was going through this thought process. And I realized that fulfillment is not something that is one big ocean that we boil, that I wanted to look at it through the lens of all aspects of my life And after putting a lot of thought into it, I came up with these, what I call 5 pillars. And I've built my entire platform on these 5 pillars. So I suggest that every single one of us wants fulfillment across these 5 life pillars. So let me unpack them. Health is both physical and mental. It's not just physical, it's physical and mental. So it warrants its own pillar, fulfillment pillar. And let me just say that if we are not looking at fulfillment in our life holistically across all of these pillars and only say I'm stuck in my career and I only look at your career pillar, this is what I realized. I realized that that would be a limiting approach. I realized that I would be cheating myself. This is how I arrived at looking at my own career journey by looking at my life holistically and said, okay, I need to look at my life through the lens of how fulfilled am I in my both physical and mental health? How fulfilled am I in my fitness? And I am not talking about competing in the Olympics or competing in anything or even having, any kind of a bodybuilder kind of physique. I'm just talking about doing the things that we need to do in life that are functional. We only spend 6 to 8 hours in bed. The rest of the time, we're up physically. Even if we're sitting at a desk, it is still physical, and we need to be able to live a physical life. And fitness is a part of that. It's an important part of that. It's unfortunately overlooked by a lot of people. While career is the thing that you may be stuck in, I know I was stuck. I also realized that my career had already experienced decades of evolution. So I had to really look at my career in the context of my overall life. So, if you're 22 and just coming out of college, maybe you're not going to have the same lens because you're just starting your career. But if you're over the age of 30, just to put a little bit of an age behind it, you've already had some career experience. Looking at your life across these 5 pillars is really important. The relationship pillar, while that may seem obvious, and it's family, it's friends, it's work colleagues, it's community, but it's also faith. Someone asked me, because I'm a person of faith, someone said, Bernie, where's faith? Because they knew I was a person of faith. I'm like, well, that's in the relationship pillar. Faith is a relationship. And then legacy is not what you might think it is. Yes, it can be. How do you want to be remembered after you're gone? But I redefine legacy to say that legacy is how do we want to have an impact today? What's the impact I want to have on people, causes, whatever it may be today? So it's really important to look at your life through these 5 pillars. And I say down here that you bring your whole body to the dentist chair. What do I mean by that? In your career, you're bringing your whole humanity. That means your health. That means your fitness. That means your relationships. And that means what impact you're having. So that's why this is shift number 1, is to think in terms of seeking fulfillment and seeking fulfillment across these 5 life pillars. Now, a lot of things that we've been taught are things that I point out here that are career strategies that cannot give us the fulfillment that we're seeking. The first one is a fairly obvious one, the ladder myth, right? Where you just want to climb the ladder. But what if you're climbing the ladder and you're getting roles that don't fit you or only fit you a little bit or don't align with your values? And then the title and pay, that's a very common one, right? You got the title, you got the pay, but you can feel incomplete. I call that having fulfillment debt. Like you can have a title, you can have the pay, but when you get up in the morning, you just don't really feel like you want to do it. You don't feel fulfilled. Going alone, going solo, that's another one that can leave us unfulfilled because you're trying to do it all on your own. And then one of my favorite ones is the one where you're just waiting for something, whatever that may be, certainty, validation, an idea, an opportunity, just waiting for something. And so if any of this resonates, then just know that you need to overcome that. And looking at it through the lens of fulfillment is the way to do that. Now, the second part of this, because there is a second part of this, and this is the process that I went through. And I did this with a pen and paper. I kid you not. I asked myself, what are my values? What are my values? And what I realized was I was dealing with value misalignment. Sundays were a dread for me because the next day was Monday and I did not want to go to work. I didn't feel constant fatigue, but I've seen people deal with fatigue or irritability. I did deal with cynicism because I was unfulfilled. I also realized that, as I just shared, I needed to look at my life holistically and understand where I'm fulfilled across the five life pillars. And then once I began to really process that, and it doesn't happen in 10 minutes, it began to really feel different. Really, really feel I'm talking about like in your soul, in my soul. I started to think about things that were meaningful and things that I can really apply my energy to and be prideful in. And then I started to put things on my calendar that aligned with that. And I started to identify things that were not negotiable, things like roles and projects. And then whatever trade offs I was making, whatever I was saying no to or saying yes to, was all part of that. So I went through an exercise. And in this exercise, I wrote down with pen and paper the following. Now, what you're seeing on screen here, and I'm going to actually bring it up here in an actual PDF. But you know what? Before I do that, let me let me grab the URL and drop it into the chat message here so that you have exactly what I'm going to review with you. And I'm going to get a little bit vulnerable with you because before I put this together in this nicely designed PDF, I did this exercise just by sitting down and taking the time to thoughtfully go through this self reflection exercise. And I was looking for clarity. What I did was I said, how fulfilled am I in each of the five pillars? And I mentioned a moment ago that I'm getting vulnerable with you because these are my real answers. Like, this is me I'm sharing with you, and I'm recording this. So you can see the scores I gave myself in each of the five pillars. You can see that I only scored myself 5 in one of the 5 pillars. I scored myself a 4 out of 5 in 2 of the pillars, and I scored myself a 3 in 2 of those pillars, career and legacy. And that's what I want to unpack with you. In career, I realized that what's working and not working was I was leveraging my 3 decades of experience in digital content marketing to a satisfactory level, but not to a fulfilling level. And frankly, the only satisfaction was the title and the paycheck, but it really wasn't fulfilling. And then on the legacy, I realized that I really wasn't touching the lives that I wanted to touch because I was just too busy doing the job that I had. So the small step that I said I can take in this area is to really understand how to leverage my marketing experience in a much more fulfilling or meaningful way. The next step that I did, remember, I did this on pen and paper long before I put this into a PDF. So you're seeing the transition from a thought in my head, pen and paper, to this PDF, which you have. It's in the chat. You can click and open that. You need to download it though in order to fill it out. It doesn't work online. Like the fields are not available to you online. You need to physically download the file and then open it up. And then you can do what you're seeing me do here. So I went through a listing of core values, and I'm not suggesting these are all the core values that anyone can have. And then I said, okay, what are my top 5 to 10 core values? And I listed them. Okay, these are my top, in this case, 8 core values. And then I went through each one of them and I rated them. And you can see that on only 2 of them, I rated myself a 5. And then again, there's a lot of 3s here: growth, legacy, impact, achievement. And then I said, okay, where am I most aligned? I'm most aligned in family, relationships, health, and fitness. Where am I most out of sync? And let me just say here, if this was a highly produced webinar, I'd probably have some sound effects. I'd probably have some balloons and like some really cool sound effects, because this was my aha moment. That's why I want to emphasize it without any special effects. Where I felt most out of sync was whatever achievement I had in my career, along with impact, I wasn't connecting them. They were not connected. I want to connect these two. I was doing it for the title and the paycheck, but I wasn't having an impact. I want to connect. This is me now. I'm not saying this is you. This is the realization that I came to. And so then I said, okay, so what's something that I see more clearly now? I can see now that I lack fulfillment in my career because I'm not connecting my desire for impact with achievement. And then what am I inspired to do? I want to share this with others to inspire others to do the self reflection and assessment of their alignment between their values and fulfillment. And that's what this is all about. And then I just unpacked it further and it took each one of these values and I reflected on them and said, okay, what can I do in the way of an action plan? And so the two that I'm going to focus in on here in the interest of time is impact. Who can I impact and how can I impact? So the action plan that I developed, and this is again back in 2023, was to develop a plan and commit to working it full time because I had been dabbling in this on the side. So once I realized that I needed to connect my experience, which for me was 3 decades of marketing, B2B marketing, digital marketing, content marketing, that kind of marketing, and connect that with having an impact. And so I needed to create and develop a plan to go do that full time. I didn't know how, but that was the commitment that I needed to do. And then from an achievement standpoint, I said, okay, I want to become known for now I'm fast forwarding a little bit because remember when I first went through this was pen and paper, but since then I've developed my leadership framework that's called fulfillment centric leadership. So the achievement that I want is to become known for fulfillment centric leadership, kind of like Simon Sinek is known for start with why. I want to be known for fulfillment centric leadership. And the achievement that I want is not limited to financial. I don't want just financial achievement. I want to have an impact. And so the action plan is to build a company. And that's what you see in the background here, Fulfilled at Work Academy, a company that empowers individuals and workplace employees to experience personal and professional fulfillment. So again, this is my story. I'm sharing this in the context of the process that I went through. I'm not saying that any of this should apply to you. What I'm hoping that you're doing as I'm walking through my journey with you, my experience, is that you're thinking to yourself how you can go through this same experience. Because again, you've got the PDF in your inbox now. Then just to kind of wrap this up here, the action plan that I put in place, and the PDF says in 30 days, but first of all, you can revisit this as many times as you want, and you can change this to 90 days or a year, whatever you want it to. So I said, I'm going to commit to launching a research report. Now that was back in 2023. So this is post-research. I published that report in October of 2024. So yes, it took me the better part of 2024 to do the research and publish the report. And that was a great achievement. And then this year, beginning of this year, I launched Fulfilled at Work Academy. So that was the action plan that I put in place. What's the support that I needed? And you can define support however you want to define it. Here's some possible ways. I know that I needed peer support. And so I started a mastermind group that I lead. And I've since also started mastermind groups in the context of Fulfilled at Work Academy for this topic of career transformation. I also know that I needed a go-to-market strategy for my business. And I needed the discipline to stay focused because I don't know if you've ever worked for yourself before, but you don't have a boss. You're your own boss. So I needed that discipline. And part of that discipline happens in peer support because there's accountability. And then I also know that I needed not only CRM, but other technologies that I could use in running the business. And I call out CRM here for business development cadence, just because it's kind of a big one and an obvious one. Why does this matter to me? Because I'm committed to aligning my experience and skills with having impact. So again, it's not about necessarily the paycheck in general. It's about, again, in my story, it's about aligning my experience and skills and having an impact. That's what I need to do to experience my fulfillment. And then what's my regular cadence? Well, I've got my mastermind group. We meet bi-weekly. And then I also have daily, what I call pod activities. And the acronym pod means that there are certain things that I do that are perpetual, meaning that I need to do them all the time. Things like posting content. I have a weekly newsletter. I have a weekly podcast. things like that that happen every week. They're perpetual. They're always happening. Outbound is, from a business development standpoint, you always have to be doing some outbound. So that's part of my regular cadence. And then deadline is there's certain things that we work on that are going to have deadlines. So you've got to have a balance of these three. And that's how I approach it. And then in the PDF that you have, you see a little marketing piece for my mastermind group. Let me come back to my PowerPoint because now that I've walked you through the process that I went through, that then over the span of time, I sort of captured that process and then put it into this values and fulfillment alignment guide, which is available as a free. I give it away for free on my website, and you all registered for this webinar, so you get it. And then so I went from chasing after big outcomes to chasing incremental progress. I also realized that I had also experienced incremental progress in many aspects of my life. For example, if you went to college, you didn't graduate college in a month, right? Like you didn't go to college and a month into starting your college career, you graduated. No, incremental progress was a semester, then the next semester, then maybe the summer off. If you took the summer off, then the next semester, you get the idea, right? That's incremental progress. So I started out by saying, okay, what's my goal? And it doesn't have to be one goal. You can identify multiple goals, but think in terms of incremental progress. So for me, my goal was to become a leadership development speaker and trainer. Now, remember, my career, 3 decades, was marketing, digital content, B2B marketing. So I was making a complete transformation. So that was my goal. What are the action steps that I was going to take to achieve that from an incremental progress standpoint? Well, I knew that I needed to make some investment in education. And not only have I made that investment, but it's ongoing. It is still happening right now. I also know that I needed to begin networking in HR circles. And I also know that I needed to launch a mastermind. And I've done that in two ways. I've launched the mastermind for my business, and I've also launched the mastermind as a service offering for people who are going through this career transformation journey on their own. And then I know that I needed to commit to daily and weekly progress. And so that means that whatever incremental progress activities I was going to do, because I began this journey while I still was working full time. So I had to do this on the side. So the time of day for me was 7 to 8 a.m. And then if I could get something in early evening, 6 to 7, 5 to 6, that kind of thing, then that was icing on the cake. By the way, I strove for that. I tried to get 2 hours a day. Some days I didn't, some days I did. But you know what I always got? I always got at least 1 hour a day because I committed to it and I put it on my calendar. And not only did I say it was 7 a.m., but I said it's going to be for an hour, not 15 minutes, not 30. It's going to be an hour. And look, the accountability is not only to myself, but that's one of the greatest values in being in a mastermind group is that you have shared accountability with your peers. And then the way that I measured and track is to measure the incremental progress over the span of time. My favorite analogy for incremental progress is the construction industry, right? The same thing. A building doesn't get constructed in a week. It gets constructed over weeks and months, depending on the size of the building. And likewise, when we set these goals and we say time of day and duration, and we're committed to them, then measure the progress over the span of time and give yourself the credit for that progress. This is huge. This mindset shift was huge for me because I wasn't thinking about boiling the ocean. I was thinking about, if I could stay with that metaphor of boiling little tiny pods of water, so to speak, instead of this gigantic ocean, by setting goals and identifying the action steps and then committing to doing them weekly and then measuring and tracking that progress. And one of the things that I like to point out, and this is actually something that a mentor of mine when I was young taught me. I think I was about 19 or 20 years old when Tony, and I don't even remember Tony's last name because I've lost contact with him, unfortunately. But I remember he said to me, he said, Bernie, select a date in the future. whether it's a year from now, in this example, I'm using 1 year. Select a date in the future and know that that date is going to arrive. So, what goal are you going to set against that date? 1 year from today, that day will arrive. What is it that you want to accomplish between now and then? And use this model of incremental progress. At the beginning, I said that this webinar is not intended to teach you how to go get a job if you're looking for a new job. But if you can harness the principles of fulfillment and the principles of incremental progress and the principles of selecting a date in the future and putting some goals against that, and then using incremental progress and measuring the progress against that, and having some accountability, you will achieve more than you give yourself credit for achieving. And so this takes me to shift number 3, and that's don't go it alone. And I have to be honest and confess that in the beginning, I was doing that. I was going it alone until I reached out to some people and I started a mastermind group. And I realized that when they all said yes, that there is this common desire, because it's in our DNA as humans, like we need to be in community with each other. And so career transformation, however you define transformation, should be no different. So one way to do it is a buddy system. It could be one individual where you can just have mutual accountability and reflection. And you need to make sure that it's someone that you respect and respects you and will respect this process of the buddy system and the mutual accountability. That's very, very important. And then you can either start your own group. I share with you that I started my mastermind group, or join one if you either know of one, or if you want to look at the one that I offer, that's certainly an option. And then a structured accountability group, that is one where there's a facilitator like myself that's in a structured framework that is really facilitating the peer support. That's actually important because in some peer groups where there isn't a facilitator, then you can stray off course. Maybe in some cases, a leader will emerge in that peer group and sort of take charge, but you do need a facilitator in order for that group to stay on target. And by on target, I mean, like, what's the purpose of the peer group? And is everyone supporting each other? And I can't emphasize enough the importance of supporting each other. And something really cool that happens, and you've probably experienced this, you know, the old adage, when you give, you always get something back, even though you're not looking for it. And the same thing happens in peer support groups. When you're supporting others, that support comes back to you. When you're supporting others, you can come to realize something that maybe you wouldn't have realized on your own. So when you're in a structured accountability group that's being facilitated by someone, that gives you sort of the optimal chance for that to happen. And I like to say down here that if you want results, meet consistently with people who care enough to ask you, did you do that thing that you said you were going to do? Because that question can not only change careers, it can change your life. So I'm going to get to the recap and the next steps here, and then just kind of open it up for conversation. First and foremost, what I'm suggesting that you do is that you chase fulfillment, not titles or compensation. Now, if you need a job, I realize that titles and compensation can be important for the paycheck. I get it. I'm not suggesting that that's not important. And if accepting a job that provides the title and or the paycheck that's going to provide for the basic needs, but still doesn't feed that fulfillment, there are other ways to feed that fulfillment. And that's where scoring and assessing your values and fulfillment alignment with the guide that you are in receipt of helps you understand where you're misaligned. Where is there a gap? And I'll give you a quick example. Years ago, when my son was young enough to play Little League Baseball, I coached his team for about 3 years. It was a volunteer role. And there was a tremendous amount of fulfillment that I experienced from that. And then a few years later, when he was, I think, a junior in high school, I joined the board of the business academy at his high school. And then he graduated, and they asked me to become the chairperson of that board. And I accepted that role. And I was a chairperson for 3 years on that board in the high school where he was no longer a student. He'd already graduated. But it was something that I was doing outside of my day job that gave me a sense of fulfillment. So I am not here to bemoan or belittle or degrade the need for a paycheck or a title that may be associated with that paycheck. So the best case scenario is we can find fulfillment in that day job. But if we have to accept a day job that may not give us all the fulfillment we want, this is why looking at your life holistically across the 5 life pillars can help you understand where can you find fulfillment. And then don't go it alone. The solo approach is something that I tried, and I quickly realized that it just doesn't work nearly as well as doing life with other people. Now, I am not the original author of this quote down here. I know it's in quotes and my name is tied to it, but I'm on record here that you've heard this before. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. That is the definition of insanity. Again, I'm not the author, but I love that saying because it's so true. If we are going after our career transformation the same way we've been doing it and kind of hitting that same dead end, this approach meaning seeking fulfillment, doing the exercise of measuring or assessing where you are fulfilled against your values and in your 5 life pillars and where there's alignment and misalignment. That is such a valuable exercise. That's the exercise that I went through. No one gave me this process, by the way. I just sat down and thought about it. And I didn't just sit down one day and 30 minutes go through this. I did this over, I don't know how many times, probably 10 times, meaning I sat down one day and just said, where am I fulfilled? And then eventually got to the 5 pillars and then eventually unpacked it layer by layer by layer. What are my values? Where am I aligned? Where am I misaligned? And I just scribbled them all down in a notebook on pen and paper. And then eventually my light bulbs went off. And that's what allowed me to realize what action I needed to do. What hole did I need to fill in my soul? Yes, I'm characterizing it that way because that was the epiphany that I had. That was the experience that I had. You may not have that same epiphany, but you can realize something that can help you understand what action you need to take. And so I said at the beginning that this webinar is the same content that's in my workshop. So let me tell you what that workshop looks like. First thing is it's 3 hours and I cap it at 20 attendees. And then we go through the same exercise. In fact, you are given a guide, which you all have now, and your homework is to show up with the values and fulfillment alignment guide completed. And you are invited to share where you're misaligned and where you're aligned and what action steps you're going to take. Now, you don't have to share everything, but I do encourage everyone to share something so that it is experiential, not like today, where for the most part, it's been me presenting this process to you. In my intensive, it's experiential. So first you'll complete the guide in advance, and then you'll come prepared to share some aspect of it. And I thought about how to price this, and I went out and I did a bunch of research, and the number that kept coming back to me was priced at $249, and I rejected it. I'm pricing it at $77. And that's just because I want it to be affordable. I want it to be an easy decision for anybody that might consider this to be something that they want to explore. And so there's the URL for it. Any thoughts, questions, comments on the process that I just shared?
Bernie, I love it. And I was thinking, of course, when you were talking and, the outside of work, because work kind of defines you. And when I was thinking about when I was most fulfilled is the other stuff. You mentioned the T-ball. I was, coaching volleyball, got involved in, kids volunteer activities. So that's a good mindset to remind me that the job is one thing. You could find fulfillment in it, or maybe you need to supplement it to find fulfillment in your life. while you're, collecting a paycheck and paying your bills. 'Cause that is definitely important. So I loved how you framed that up. That is not necessarily about the job, because most of us, work to live and not live to work. So thank you
Right.
for sharing this.
Thank you for the comment, Tom. Yes, so true, so true. And sometimes we just have to do some self-reflection along with the peer level support to be reminded of that. Other
Yeah, Bernie, it's
thoughts?
Alicia. Yeah, I was just gonna say this was really helpful. Just a little bit about myself. I was, recently impacted from the last layoff round. Having been there for almost 20 years, for me, it wasn't a shock either. I kind of saw it coming, but at the same time, being at the company for so long, it was like, what do I do now? And I've also had kind of this creative, I know you mentioned it as like side hustles in one of your previous slides. And so I think when the layoff happened, it gave me a chance to say, okay, here's a clean slate. Where do I want to go from here in my career? Do I want to be, a small business owner going forward? And I think some of the tips with this whole guide that you provided are super helpful in terms of being able to focus in and being able to kind of take the wins of the inner, the small steps, the small accomplishments on the way. So super helpful. I think I've just been kind of juggling between, do I want to go more back to corporate or do I want to kind of look at small business opportunities? So
Sure.
yeah, super helpful for me. Thank you.
Good, good. Thank you for sharing that, Alicia. I shared with you how, in my case, it wasn't another job. That's just my story, but I came to the realization that I needed to marry, if you will, my 3 decades of B2B marketing, because I boil marketing down to one simple concept, and that's communication. All marketing is communication. And all marketing has one of two purposes, either to influence a behavior or an action like buy now, or influence how we think about something, about a brand or whatever. And so once I realized that I wanted to leverage my experience, my skills, all of that, but have an impact, like that's the realization that I came to. I was lacking fulfillment because I was just doing it for brands because they were paying me to do it, to market their products. But there was no fulfillment because I wasn't having any kind of an impact. So that's what led me to this. I've never been more passionate about communicating this message. This is what I mean by marrying my experience, my marketing experience, which is communicating to leaders at organizations that when employees experience fulfillment, personal and professional fulfillment, employees thrive. And thriving employees do great work. And that same approach, that same mindset applies in our career transformation. So it has so much applicability in society that I just feel compelled and enthusiastic. Hopefully it shows to share it. So that's what this is all about. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap it there. Hey, thanks for watching. I hope this webinar replay gave you new clarity and maybe even a fresh sense of what's possible for you in your career and your life. And hey, if you want to go deeper, I invite you to join me for the Clarity to Fulfillment Intensive, a live small group workshop where you'll work through the alignment guide, share your insights, and walk away with an actionable plan. You'll find the link right here with this video with upcoming dates. Each session maxes out at 20 spots, so grab yours. I'd love to see you there. Hey, this is Bernie Borges, founder of Fulfilled at Work Academy, and I wish you fulfillment across the 5 life pillars.